Hi there, and Happy New Year. Today I'm going to review a pretty recent book called We Defy, written by Jack Murphy. And it's all about the United States Army Special Forces. Now, the Special Forces were stood up in the 60s by a group of officers who had a background in the OSS, the wartime OSS, and they saw a need for a similar organisation to be carried forward, particularly with the Cold War. And they won the approval of President Kennedy, and so the famed Green Berets came into being. Now, their major aims of the Special Forces included guerrilla warfare and what was known as foreign internal defence, which involved the training of guerrillas and friendly forces against the enemies. But as this book tells, and quite a bit of it is a revelation for the first time, there were a number of projects and units started within Special Forces for particular roles at a particular time and place. And the first of these was Det Alpha, which was based in Berlin. And Berlin, during the Cold War, was a hotbed of espionage and military spying in particular. It was a unique place. It was a city which was under the occupation of four powers, but it was in the middle of, or totally surrounded by communist East Germany. So the strategic and the tactical implications of Berlin were enormous. It was the divided city, it was the interface between East and West, the ideological barrier. So Det Alpha was a branch of the Green Berets based in Berlin at a former SS barracks. And their job included, very similar to what the Jedburghs did in World War II, the OSS/SOE Jedburgh teams, which are designed to infiltrate in the occupied countries, particularly France, prior to D-Day. And the Det was able to do this because they had a large number of former German soldiers who'd come over under Congressional Act, joined the United States Army, gone into Special Forces, and their linguistic and cultural abilities were an asset to this particular Det. So they knew the areas, and they could obviously convincingly pass off as German. And the non-German members all had to learn German, learn the dress, the customs and so on. And they set up networks, and largely their job would have been in a stay-behind capacity. Once the Soviets rolled over, they would then be behind the front lines, and with cached weapons and so on, would foment either insurrection, sabotage efforts, and communication of intelligence and so on. They had to be able to pass as locals at all time doing this, and the reconnaissance jobs they had. So they dressed appropriately, leather jackets and so on. They had appropriately length hair, facial hair and so on. And this upset quite a few of the conventional army. And there were cases also of Special Forces soldiers being sent without knowing what Det Alpha was. They would be sent from 10th Special Forces at Bad Tolz, which was the main Special Forces Germany unit, to Berlin, expecting it to be just another posting, and then found that they were in this hotbed. And the whole thing was completely secret for obvious reasons, but also for the fact that under the Four Powers agreements, no paratroops were allowed to be stationed in Berlin. Now, it's very, very probable that the Soviets broke this, but the Americans had to be very, very circumspect about it. As international terrorism erupted in the late 60s and into the 70s, Det Alpha was given another role as a counter-terrorist unit, particularly concerned because there was a Pan Am flight into Tempelhof, and the threat of hijacking and so on was very real. So they trained for that role. So for several years they had this dual role. So they were highly skilled in many, many aspects. So much so that when Operation Eagle Claw was in the planning stage, which was the rescue of the Tehran embassy personnel by Delta, they brought in an element from Det Alpha to be part of the assault force actually within Tehran. They had specific targets there. So they were their abilities were without a doubt recognized. At the end of the Cold War, as the wall came down, quite understandably, Det Alpha wasn't needed anymore. It was disbanded. Then another Special Forces unit was created, again due to international terrorism, with things like Entebbe, the Munich attack on the Olympics, the Israeli Olympic team, Mogadishu, the Lufthansa hijack, and GSG-9 assault on the aircraft, the rescue. This all alerted the powers that be in the Pentagon to a deficit within the United States arsenal. And they had asked if anyone had the capabilities, and Charlie Beckwith, who for many, many years had been proposing an SAS type unit, having been attached to 22 SAS early in his career, and he'd been hammering away at this, and his work was dug out, and he was given the job of creating what became Delta Force. But quite realistically, he said it was going to take 2 years to select, train, and then rehearse and validate the unit. So in the interim, Special Forces really were, they sort of resented Delta Force in a way, because the way it was set up, it was a national asset, and it was outside of the command structure of Special Forces. It had direct Secretary of Defense level access. So a unit called Blue Light was created as an interim measure, and it was purely understood for this. There's been some confusion that they kind of were in competition with Delta, and then to see who would turn out to get the counter-terrorist role. No, it was set up purely as an interim, while Delta was being put through the various phases it needed to be a properly constituted unit. Blue Light would be an ad hoc but capable unit in the meantime. So they did a lot of training. There was a training establishment at Mott Lake, the Mott Lake compound, called Special Operations Training, which had a very, very good CQB setup, and they used that extensively. All the different scenarios, aircraft, vehicle interdiction, all the different scenarios and phases. But then, as Delta was validated, and it was validated several times, including by international observers from the SAS and GSG-9, give it the full go-ahead. Blue Light was then redundant, and then Charlie Beckwith gathered some of the senior NCOs from Blue Light, got them into a room and gave them the opportunity to try out for Delta. And this caused a lot of grumbling, and these guys didn't see why they needed to go through selection, and there was a lot of resentment. And but the fact is that Charlie Beckwith was correct. The only way you could really get Delta to the level that it was needed as an international counter-terrorist force was by having selected personnel for certain qualities. And the proof of this really became that the selection process had something like a 10% pass rate, and the majority of the people who were trying out, particularly in the first couple of selection courses, were from Special Forces and the Rangers. So even these guys who were without a doubt good soldiers, only 10% of them had what it took to get into what became a Tier 1 unit. So Beckwith was right there, but there was one female member of Blue Light. Bob Mountell had seen the need or the advantage of having a female to be part of reconnaissance and this kind of thing, lower in the profile. Her name was Katie, and Charlie Beckwith said he had no use for her. But obviously, years later, there was a whole section of females who were a support element. They didn't go through operator training, but proved very, very useful to both Delta and to SEAL Team 6 or Development Group. By the way, I'll just mention now that this isn't in the book as such, but it's just that, as I mentioned, Charlie Beckwith was pushing for an SAS type unit all this time. And when he stood up Delta, the SAS did put some of their guys through selection in Hereford, and also sent instructors over to Fort Bragg and helped in the creation of Delta. But this was a two-way street, because earlier on, when the SAS first came back from Malaya and was established in Hereford, initially they were in Malvern, but then Hereford, and they went into an intense training phase because their role had changed from a pure jungle fighting unit to being a NATO asset and also with a worldwide remit. And they went over in Squadron Strength to America and trained at Fort Bragg, and found a lot of value, particularly in the medical training, live tissue work, for example, the DEMS, very advanced explosives work, and things like Halo, freefall. So there was a two-way street in the history of Delta and 22 SAS. Okay, so the next unit that the book discusses is a most amazing and very, very secret unit called Green Light. Now, I remember Marcus telling me about this. He had a couple of friends who were members of this unit, and when he told me what their role was, it sounded like a plot to one of his books, one of his thrillers, but it was all real and amazing. And the picture that's the cover of this book, which is of a freefaller, I showed this picture to a friend of mine, and he said, "Oh yeah," and I said, "Do you know what that object is he's free-falling with?" And he said, "No." I said, "It's an atomic weapon," and the guy was absolutely amazed. And what it was, these were guys who were tasked with infiltrating into various enemy or opposition countries, Soviet aligned countries, with what was called a special atomic demolition munition. These weighed anything up to about 70 pounds, and it would be done either by free fall, often Halo, or by scuba, by subaqua, and then taken to a target which would be something like a bridge, a dam, a communications node, and the weapon would be emplaced and primed to be detonated with a signal. Now, the guys who performed this task, obviously they had to have the infill skills, but also they had intensive training in the arming procedures and the security procedures, and the information security as well, because the whole role was very, very secret. And quite often the green light teams would get a sudden fastball activation. They would go pick up the weapon, get aboard the aircraft, fly for several hours, many hours, be briefed that they were landing in somewhere like Cuba or North Korea, given a target and so on, and then off the tailgate. But when they land, they're actually on a drop zone somewhere in the United States. And it was an exercise just to test the ability to get the job done quickly and that nobody would hesitate. So, with the various arms reduction treaties, as the Cold War sort of became more of a cooperative event, the green light teams were disbanded or re-rolled, and as far as anyone knows, that capability has been lost, but who knows? It was all secret at the time, and would no doubt be secret now. And then finally, the book covers CIF, Commanders in Extremis Force, which was set up as a unit which had counter-terrorist and hostage rescue capabilities for a commander in a particular geographical area to have at his call for any terrorist events that necessitated it. So they trained again at Montlake, going through very, very long CQB hostage rescue training, urban assault, all the different options that they had to go through, very intensive weapons training, for example, fitness, the ability to plan and execute very, very fast moving operations. They were then tasked as part of JSOC, as a support element of JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, which was created after the debacle in Iran at Eagle's Claw, Desert One. Because it was such a disparate operation with units, the air assets, the fixed wing and rotary, and the ground assets never really were all on the same page. And the after action report really criticised the helicopter element as much as they could. And unfortunately, and this is something that infests the military, is Buggin's turn. Everybody wanted a piece of the action, whether or not they were suited to do it. So JSOC was stood up for this. Unfortunately, that suffers from the same thing. And we had a time during the early days of the Great War on Terror where both the commander and the deputy commander of JSOC were both from the aviation side, which to me is ridiculous. For example, UK Special Forces doesn't have a helicopter pilot running it. They're just seen as the means of delivery. Anyway, that's just my little rant. So the SIF were became tasked to JSOC to be kind of a fire brigade, fast reaction to an event, while one of the National Mission Force, Delta or Dev Group, was spun up. So that was the theory. The problem was that you can't really envisage a scenario where that would happen, mainly because the SIF's logistic assets, especially aviation, they didn't have really dedicated aviation. Most of them didn't. Excuse me. Whereas Delta and SEAL Team 6 did. So they'd probably be there first anyway. But meanwhile, the commanders who were supposed to have this force were going, hey, where's my guys? And when they wanted them to do something, there was some were committed to JSOC. So there was a lot of resentment and politics and jealousy intruded, and the SIF, which was a highly capable force, was stood down. It was kind of resurrected in a different form, but basically it was wound up. So Jack Murphy, who himself served in Special Forces, has really presented a significant contribution to Special Operations history with this book. It shone a light in many areas. He interviewed many of the actual participants in these activities, went into the archives, and has put together a document or a book that really covers the subject fully for the first time. There has been a book about Det Alpha, for example, but all the other aspects is covered really for the first time. I found it fascinating, the insights, and it's really, you could say it's a significant warning for any future activities of this sort about the kind of problems they're likely to face, both from the more conventional military or from within their own organisation, or, as I say, Buggin's turn type things. So, there is kind of an implicit warning in it. Really good book, and I recommend it.